The silence in that small-town bar broke like glass when the first scream cut the air. Until that moment, it had been an ordinary evening. The kind of night where the jukebox hummed the same country tune it had played twice already, where the scent of fried onions clung to the wood-paneled walls, and where regulars slouched in their chairs with long-necked bottles sweating onto cardboard coasters. The air carried the mix of cheap beer, cigarettes clinging to jackets, and the faint tang of rain from outside, drifting in through the cracked door. It was late spring, the kind of warm evening that softened people's edges. Everyone knew each other in that bar. The waitress called half the patrons by name. The bartender never needed to ask for anyone's order. It was a place where fights didn't start, because everyone had too much history to risk it. Comfort was baked into the very planks of the floor. That comfort ended when the door opened wide enough to let in the night, and with it, a group of bikers. 4, maybe 5. Big men with weathered jackets patched over with skulls and flames, helmets dangling from their fingers. They brought with them not just noise, but weight, the kind that changes how a room breathes. Their boots struck the floor with a rhythm that didn't belong to this town. The bartender stiffened immediately, forcing a smile that looked brittle. The jukebox song stuttered as someone unplugged it by accident. Conversation dropped to half volume. The men didn't order right away. They laughed too loudly, surveyed the room, and made it clear they weren't here just for a beer. At first, the tension showed only in small ways. A man at the bar shifted his stool closer to the counter. A couple near the door leaned toward each other, their smiles too tight. The waitress, Anna, 22, long braid, tired eyes from working doubles, approached with practiced patience, pad in hand. One biker made a comment about her smile, another added something dirtier. It was the kind of exchange people wanted to believe would burn out on its own. Anna laughed it off, kept her eyes on her notepad, and took their order. She turned away, shoulders stiff. The men didn't let it go. Their voices rose, filling the room with mockery aimed at her, the bartender, even the old men nursing drafts in the corner. Most of the regulars lowered their eyes, pretending to be absorbed in their drinks, each of them making the same calculation. If they stayed quiet, maybe this storm would pass. But storms rarely pass when fed. The moment broke when one of the bikers reached across the aisle, caught Anna's wrist as she set down their beers, and pulled her closer. The sound of glass hitting the table too hard echoed sharp against the wood. She tried to pull away, voice tight, but his grip only tightened. His friends hooted, egging him on. Then came the snap, not of bone, but of fabric. With a sudden, ugly tug, he tore her sleeve clean down the seam, cotton ripping loud enough to echo against the low ceiling. The sound cut the room sharper than any slap. For a split second, the bar froze. Nobody moved. A man near the back dropped his pool cue. The clatter felt deafening. Anna gasped, tears springing instantly, her free hand scrambling to cover herself. The patrons broke into fragments of reaction. A woman cried out. Someone cursed under their breath, but didn't rise. A man near the door muttered, "Jesus Christ," but stayed seated, jaw clenched. It was as if everyone felt the same pull of outrage and fear, locked between the instinct to protect and the knowledge that stepping in could end badly. The biker laughed, loud and cruel, holding her wrist like a trophy. His friends banged their fists on the table, shouting over each other. Anna's face crumpled, not just from pain, but humiliation. She looked around, desperate, as if someone, anyone, might stop it. What she found instead was a crowd paralyzed by silence. The injustice was loud, louder than the bikers' laughter, louder than the jukebox now restarted and playing unnoticed. It filled every corner of the room. People stared at their drinks, at the floor, at each other. The air felt poisoned with helplessness. And underneath it all, an unspoken question began to spread, moving from table to table, glass to glass, breath to breath. Would anyone stop this? Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down below. At the far corner of the bar, beneath the sickly glow of a neon beer sign, a man who had been nearly invisible all night finally rose from his chair. He had sat there for over an hour, quiet, steady, glass of water in front of him, ball cap low over his eyes, posture loose enough to be mistaken for fatigue. When he stood, he didn't hurry. He slid a bill beneath the sweating glass, pushed the chair back into place, and straightened his frame with a calmness that felt deliberate. The shift in the room was immediate. Somebody near the jukebox whispered at first, like a secret not meant to leave their lips. "That's Chuck Norris." The name spread across the bar the way a spark runs through dry grass. Heads turned. Conversations stalled mid-word. A regular froze with a pool cue still in his hand. Even the bartender, who had been polishing a glass with frantic circles, slowed until his rags simply hung there. The bikers sensed it too, though they tried to mask it with louder laughter and sharper grins. The one gripping Anna's wrist turned slightly, eyes narrowing, grin faltering. He didn't loosen his grip, at least, not yet, but the weight of the moment pressed against him, making the act look smaller than it had seconds before. Chuck stepped forward, moving with the kind of pace that refused drama. His boots struck the wooden floor softly, rhythm even, posture upright. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't marching in like a savior. It was the opposite, an arrival so plain, so unforced, that it unsettled the men who thrived on noise. He reached Anna first. His presence alone shifted her breathing, slowed the stutter in her chest. He looked at her, not the biker, his gaze assessing whether she was standing by her own choice or held upright by fear. His hand rose slowly, palm open, nothing threatening in it. Her eyes welled but steadied. For the first time since the sleeve had torn, she looked like she might breathe again. The biker tried to salvage control. He tugged her wrist higher, turned back toward his friends, and said loud enough for everyone, "What now, cowboy? Gonna order me a sarsaparilla?" His friends barked obedient laughs, too sharp, too quick, but they died in the air. Chuck's words weren't for him. He leaned slightly to Anna. "You're safe now." Quiet, barely above the hum of a fridge motor. She nodded, and at that subtle nod, his fingers touched the crook of the biker's hand, just enough to suggest release. To everyone's astonishment, the biker's grip slackened without protest. Chuck didn't yank her free. He helped her pull back on her own, giving her agency instead of spectacle. The bartender half raised a hand, ready to intervene, then froze when Chuck's glance told him, without speaking, that the moment had its own rules. Anna backed toward the kitchen door, clutching her torn sleeve. Chuck shifted half a step, angling his shoulder so she had cover without feeling exposed. "Go on," he said. Not a command, but permission. She moved. The crowd parted instinctively, like a tide opening for her. The swinging door flapped shut behind her, leaving a silence that suddenly belonged to him. Now the room had no distractions. The biker who had grabbed her rolled his neck and forced a smirk. But his eyes betrayed nerves, a flicker of awareness he couldn't mask. He stepped into Chuck's space, trying to reclaim ground with presence alone. "You scare easy crowds," he barked. "But this ain't Hollywood." His hand came up and pressed flat against Chuck's chest. Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't slap it away. He simply looked at the hand, then at the man. "Take it back," he said. His tone was steady, almost conversational. "With respect." The word landed heavier than a fist. A woman near the bar gasped softly. One of the bikers muttered something, but didn't laugh. The room felt the weight of the demand. Not a threat, not a plea. A rule. Respect? The biker sneered, trying to puff himself back up. "Respect this." He shoved harder. Chuck's movement was surgical. 2 fingers hooked the man's thumb, a turn so subtle the shoulder rolled forward before the mind caught up. The biker's hand peeled off his chest like a glove sliding loose. Chuck didn't twist harder, didn't escalate. He simply returned the hand, intact, leaving the man staring at his own palm as though it had betrayed him. The crowd sucked in air. Someone at the pool table muttered, "Jesus," under his breath. Another biker stood from the booth now, younger, tattoos winding up his forearms, jaw tight with drink. He pointed at Chuck like a prosecutor. "You think you're some kind of legend?" His laugh was hollow, like glass against stone. "This is a bar, not a dojo." Chuck allowed himself the faintest shift of expression, a smile, but stripped of humor. "Bars still have rules," he replied. "Same as anywhere else. You don't put hands on people who didn't ask for it." The sentence traveled through the crowd like a dropped stone into water. Some nodded instinctively, others stiffened, as though choosing sides against their own conscience. The younger biker stepped closer, posture sharp, looking for escalation. The first one, recovering from humiliation, tried to join him, voice raised. "You got a problem with us, old man?" Chuck's reply was direct, calm, almost surgical. "No, I have a problem with what you did." His gaze flicked briefly to the kitchen door where Anna had disappeared. You can fix part of it. Start with an apology. The word apology sucked the air from the room. Heads turned, eyes wide. It was an unfamiliar demand in a place where apologies were rare currency. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not applause, not boos, just the collective awareness that something had shifted. The younger biker laughed too loudly, trying to crush the moment. How about I teach you some manners instead? He stepped right into Chuck's space, shoulders squared, breath thick with whiskey. Chuck lowered his chin slightly, spine unmoving. His voice softened, a single word that landed sharper than a threat. Don't. The bar fell still. Bottles stopped clinking. The jukebox blinked quietly in the corner. The only sound was the younger biker's boots scuffing the floor as he leaned forward. And then he shoved. The crowd leaned in, hearts thudding, knowing the balance of the night was about to tip, either toward violence or toward something none of them had ever seen before. The shove landed flat on Chuck's chest, a gesture more about spectacle than damage. The biker leaned in with his weight, hoping the force of it would bend the older man back, reclaim control of the room. The bottles on the bar rattled. A woman near the jukebox flinched. But Chuck didn't move. The push vanished into him like water against stone. His eyes stayed calm, unblinking. Then he raised his hand, slow, precise, not a strike, but a correction. 2 fingers pressed against the biker's wrist. His thumb angled a joint the wrong way, and the man's arm peeled back as if disobeying its owner. A small circle, almost invisible, shifted the balance. The biker's stance collapsed. He stumbled, caught air, then crashed against a chair. A bottle toppled and rolled, hissing foam across the table. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was silence. Heavy raw. The kind of silence that belongs in places where something irreversible has just happened. Chuck didn't advance. He stayed rooted, hands low, posture even. His eyes left the man on the floor and found the kitchen door. Through the round window, Anna's outline was visible, clutching her sleeve, a co-worker's arm wrapped around her shoulders. When she saw him look, her chin lifted just enough to be seen. Chuck gave the smallest nod, acknowledgement without show. The biker scrambled up, face flushed, teeth clenched, breath ragged. He glared, searching for a line to recover his pride, but none came. His friends shifted uneasily in their seats. One half stood, then sank back. Another muttered something no one heard. The youngest, ink spiraling down his arm, kept bouncing his leg, his body coiled tight. Sit down, Chuck said evenly. No growl, no volume, just fact. The biker barked out a laugh that fooled no one. Make me. His voice cracked, a little too high. He tried to square his shoulders again, but the swagger was gone. Chuck's gaze didn't waver. Don't compound it. The words landed like stone. For a moment, the biker looked as if he might listen, but pride pulled him forward. He lunged, half punch, half grab, angry more than skilled. It ended in a blink. Chuck slid his hips, redirected with one hand at the elbow, the other behind the neck, and turned the man's own momentum into collapse. The biker's boots crossed clumsily. His knee hit the floorboards with a crack. He caught himself with a slap that echoed through the room. The move was clean, efficient, unshowy. The crowd let out a collective "oh." Not surprise exactly, more recognition, like seeing the answer to a problem that had been in front of them all along. The younger, tattooed biker couldn't stay seated. He tripped. He shouted too loudly, scrambling for his friend's dignity. Then he shoved his table back and stepped forward, jaw clenched, movements jittery from adrenaline and alcohol. Try that on me. Chuck didn't bite. He shifted slightly, body angled so the aisle to the kitchen stayed shielded. His eyes flicked once at the first man, still kneeling. Sit down, he repeated, calm, insistent. But the younger one rushed him. This time Chuck met him earlier. A soft catch of the wrist, a step that wasn't even full, just enough to guide momentum where it didn't belong. The biker folded, off balance before he knew it. Chuck escorted him backward until the edge of the booth clipped his thighs. He dropped into the seat hard, his face flashing shock at being placed instead of beaten. A ripple of nervous laughter sputtered through the bar, then died. The room wasn't mocking him. It was registering the shift in power. Chuck remained upright, composed. His attention returned to the first biker, now pushing to his feet again, humiliated twice over. Chuck didn't gloat, didn't sneer. His words were the same as before, offered like a door still open. You can fix part of it. Start with an apology. The word hung in the stale air. Some nodded quietly. Others stiffened, refusing to be moved. The bartender froze with 2 shot glasses in his hand. The kid in the dinosaur hoodie leaned forward over the railing, lips parted, seeing something he would remember for life. The biker's throat worked. His jaw flexed. Rage and shame warred in the lines of his face. He looked toward his friends, but they were no longer his shield. The younger one rubbed his wrist, staring at the table. Another avoided eye contact altogether. And then, from the booth, another figure rose. Older, heavier, patches worn smooth on his jacket, eyes pale and cold. He hadn't moved once until now. He stepped into the aisle with the deliberate calm of a man who had nothing to prove, because he'd proved it long ago. The room felt it instantly. The tension shifted. It wasn't the bravado of youth anymore. It was something harder, heavier. The kind of presence that meant the story wasn't finished. Chuck's shoulders lowered just slightly, as if he'd measured the new weight already. He faced the bigger man, steady as ever. And the crowd leaned forward, breath caught, knowing the night had just turned toward something deeper, something no one could predict. The largest of them rose at last. He didn't rush. He unfolded from the booth like a shadow claiming space. The lamp above swung as his shoulder brushed it, scattering pale light across the bar. The room felt smaller with him standing, his jacket patched, his eyes washed out blue, cold and certain. He had the look of a man who'd put people down before and never paid for it. He walked forward, boots heavy on the boards, stopping so close the leather of his jacket creaked. Chuck could smell oil and smoke clinging to him. "You think that little stunt means anything?" the man said, voice low but wide enough for everyone to hear. "You think we're afraid of some washed-up movie cowboy? Out here there are no cameras." The words seemed to push into every corner. The bartender froze with a towel still in his hand. At the kitchen window, Anna's face appeared, pale, her braid loose, one hand pressed to her torn sleeve. Around the room, people straightened without realizing it. It felt like a chessboard one move from collapse. Chuck didn't square up. He didn't change expression. If anything, there was a trace of fatigue in his eyes, like someone who had seen this mistake too many times. His hands remained low, palms open, body angled slightly between the biker and the door to the kitchen. The big man wanted noise. "Respect is what you take," he barked, and with a sudden jerk of his boot, he kicked a two-top onto its side. Glass exploded, silverware rang on the floor. A woman near the jukebox gasped. The dinosaur hoodie kid grabbed the rail with both fists, frozen. Chuck's gaze stayed level, steady as if nothing had happened. He didn't look at the broken glass, didn't react to the crash. His silence did more damage than words. Against it, the biker's show of strength looked like a tantrum. "See this?" the man shouted, spreading his arms to the room. "He's nothing. He won't move." But the silence that met him wasn't agreement. It was absence. His own crew sat stiff, their faces caught between loyalty and doubt. He leaned close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. His grin was forced, his voice harsh. "What are you going to do? Quote me a fortune cookie? This is my house now." Chuck's reply came quiet, but every ear caught it. Rooms belong to the ones who protect them. Fear never lasts. The words cracked something. A murmur ran along the bar, low, involuntary, the sound of people remembering which side they were on. The leader heard it and twitched, as if betrayal was hiding in the air. His temper snapped. He grabbed a half-full glass and hurled it against the wall. Beer splashed, shards clattered. "You hear me now?" he roared. Chuck didn't flinch. His weight shifted forward just enough that fighters recognized it for what it was, readiness. He lifted one hand, palm open, blade straight, stopping an invisible car. "Don't," he said, soft but final. The word struck harder than a shout. The biker sneered, furious that calm could cut him down. He pressed his chest into Chuck's, a heavy bump meant to prove size meant power. Chuck didn't return it. He absorbed it and stayed still, unmoved. The bar was silent except for the hiss of beer dripping from the wall. Outside, rain tapped on the awning, muffled but constant. Inside, people clenched their fists under tables, waiting for the break. "Look at me when I talk," the leader demanded. Chuck's eyes were already on him. The order shrank into something childish. Anna stood half-hidden behind the kitchen door. She had stopped shaking. Her fear had cooled into something harder, her gaze fixed on the two men. The biker drew back, rolling his shoulders. He needed to make the night his again. He took a step away, planting his boots like a sprinter, giving himself runway. The grin returned, thin, mean, as he lunged, arm cocked, ready to throw the first true punch of the night. Every chair, every breath in the room leaned forward with him, bracing for the moment when calm would finally give way to violence. And Chuck, at last, moved. The big man came forward like a storm front, boots sliding through spilled beer, shoulder dropped, arm cocked for a wild swing meant to erase the room's doubt in one blow. Gasps rippled ahead of him. Someone shouted too late. Chairs scraped as people braced. Chuck didn't retreat. He shifted, a movement so small it almost went unseen. His left foot marked new ground, hips angled, eyes steady. The punch passed into absence. Two fingers brushed the biker's elbow, a palm redirected the storm, and suddenly the big man was folding into the floorboards, not struck, not thrown, just guided into collapse by his own momentum. The crash of his knee hitting wood was louder than the glass that had shattered minutes earlier. For a moment, silence swelled, the kind of silence that arrives when everyone realizes a line has been crossed and nothing will reset it. Chuck stayed upright, hands low, his breath steady. He didn't press forward. His eyes flicked toward Anna, still framed by the kitchen window, her knuckles white around the dish towel. She met his gaze, just long enough to feel steadied. The biker's men rose half a step. One shoved his chair, the other clenched fists. They had the look of dogs straining against a chain. Chuck didn't even turn. "Don't," he said, a word delivered without volume, yet carrying across the room like a strike. They froze. The chain held. The leader pushed himself up, pride dragging his body upright. His jaw was locked, lips drawn thin, eyes glassy with a fury that no longer knew what to do with itself. He lunged again, shorter this time, aiming for a clinch. Chuck moved like water poured into the cracks. A hand on the collarbone, another at the back of the neck, and the man's mass twisted sideways against its will. His feet tangled, his chest heaved. Then, before gravity humiliated him, Chuck steadied him back to standing. It wasn't defeat. It was demonstration. The crowd felt it. Strength wasn't in destruction, but in control. That realization traveled through the room in a ripple of awe. The bartender whispered, "He's not even fighting him," as though afraid the words might change the truth. The leader roared in frustration and dove again, this time low, desperate to use sheer weight. Chuck's hips vanished. The tackle found air. One wrist caught. A twist no bigger than a coin turned, and the biker dropped to one knee a second time. His palm smacked the floor. Chuck hovered over him, not pinning, not striking, just shaping the choice. You can stop, or you can break yourself here. The silence that followed was alive. You could hear the rain easing outside, the faint tick of broken glass settling. Inside, every lung held back breath, every eye fixed on whether the man would rise or relent. Chuck's voice came calm, but firm. Enough. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It set the terms of the room. The biker's lieutenants stayed put, hearts still wanting violence, but bodies unwilling to trigger it. The youngest stared at his wrist, as if remembering the way his momentum had betrayed him. The older one studied the floor, jaw tight. The leader lifted his head. His breath came ragged, chest rising like a bellows. He searched Chuck's face for mockery and found none. Only patience, the quiet pity of a man who knew he'd seen this play out too many times before. The crowd began to shift, their fear transformed into something sharper, judgment. A woman at the bar whispered, "He didn't hurt him," and people nodded. The boy in the dinosaur hoodie gripped the rail tighter, eyes wide as though memorizing every second. Slowly, painfully, the biker rose once more. The power that had made him taller than the room was gone. His men no longer looked at him for direction. The bar wasn't his stage anymore. Chuck gave him space. He didn't threaten, didn't gloat. Just stood there, steady, waiting for the man to decide what kind of ending he wanted to leave behind. Then the kitchen door creaked open, and Anna stepped out. She looked fragile, eyes red, sleeve torn, but her spine was straight, and she walked forward without hiding. The leader saw her. Something in his shoulders faltered. His bravado wilted in the presence of the one person he'd wronged most openly. Chuck's gaze didn't leave him. "Get your men," he said softly. "Make this right." The sentence settled into the air like a verdict. Not a threat, a demand for dignity. The room waited. Would the biggest man in the bar finally bend, or would he choose the road that led to ruin? He looked at her longer than he meant to. Anna's face, red eyes, sleeve torn, jaw trembling but held firm, was enough to break the mask he wore. The bar, a moment ago braced for violence, now waited for a verdict. The leader's fists opened and closed like rusted hinges. His chest rose once, heavy, and then sagged. He turned toward Chuck, saw no gloating there, no fire to fight. Just a boundary that could not be moved. His voice came cracked, barely more than a rasp. I went too far. The sentence bent the air. Nobody cheered. Nobody mocked. Instead, a quiet rolled across the room, as if people were adjusting to a new gravity. One of his men shifted his weight, stared at the floor. The bartender's towel dropped to the counter. The boy in the dinosaur hoodie leaned forward, memorizing every detail with the intensity of someone who knew he'd tell it later. Chuck didn't answer right away. He let the silence do its work. The leader, cornered by stillness, turned toward Anna. The effort cost him. His jaw clenched, teeth grinding. Then, with visible struggle, he forced out the words. "I'm sorry." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't for the room. It was for her. Anna's breath shook. She didn't say it was fine. She didn't know him that. She gave a small nod, sharp, clean, as if to say, "I heard you." That was enough. The room shifted on its axis. Chuck's voice cut through softly. A real man doesn't put hands on a woman. If you can't learn that, you've already lost. The line wasn't for applause. It was for truth. The regulars at the bar, men who'd been silent all night, blinked as though a curtain had lifted. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The leader inhaled, shoulders rising with the effort of swallowing pride. Then he said to his crew, "We're leaving." The order sounded flat, stripped of bravado, but final. His men obeyed, relieved, ashamed, silent. Money slapped onto the bar, too much, and nobody counted it. They filed toward the door slower than they had entered. Boots muted on wet floorboards, jackets brushing chairs, one ring clinking against an overturned table. At the door, the big man hesitated, looked back, not at Chuck, but at Anna. He held her gaze, then stepped into the rain. Engines coughed to life outside, faded down the road, swallowed by water and night. Silence filled the bar again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was release. A woman pulled Anna into her arms. Another draped a jacket over her shoulders. The cook appeared with ice wrapped in a towel. The bartender poured a glass of water, set it in front of her with a nod. Anna sipped, placed it back down, and steadied herself. Around them, people began to repair the room. A man righted the flipped table, another swept shards with his bare hands, careful as if the pieces were alive. The jukebox blinked, but no one fed it coins. A couple reclaimed their booth and sat without speaking, hands joined under the table. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Respect means stopping things like that, right?" She answered, "Yes," voice thick with certainty. Through it all, Chuck had already stepped back to his corner. His glass of water still held a ring of condensation. He lifted it, drank, and set it down, posture loose, face unreadable. No speech, no smile. He let the bar breathe on its own. Anna approached him, sleeve pinned with a safety clip. Up close, she looked worn but unbroken. "Thank you," she said. The words carried no decoration, just truth. Chuck met her eyes, then glanced at her steady hand. "You held your ground," he said quietly. That mattered. It wasn't consolation. It was recognition. She exhaled, shoulders releasing. The last of the tension leaked from the room. People moved more freely, voices low but human again. The bartender finally straightened. "We're closing early," he said, half to himself. Nobody argued. Chairs scraped softly as people began to leave, some pausing to place a hand on Anna's shoulder, others nodding once at Chuck, words unnecessary. Chuck stood when the bartender approached. They shook hands, firm, brief. "Take care of your people," Chuck said. The bartender nodded, eyes wet. And then Chuck slipped out. The door closed behind him without anyone catching the exact moment. He left no engines, no spotlight, just rain tapping steady on the awning. The bar smelled of cleaner and beer, sharp with the fading tang of adrenaline. Later, the story would spread, bent and sharpened. Some would swear Chuck dropped a man with one punch. Others would say he never touched him at all. But the ones who were there would keep the truer memory. The crash of a table, the silence that followed, the choice made in front of everyone. And how? At the center of it, a quiet man reminded them that strength isn't in breaking, but in refusing to.